Warm days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by King Newbie, Mr. Matt Freeman.
That's right. We're coming at you live from the Lincoln Tunnel, and it's very dark in here. Very dark.
Boo.
You got me.
I don't know what I expected your reaction to that to be, but that was not it. Just a stone-faced, you got me. This week on the podcast, The Stand continues with chapters 29 through 35. The world basically comes to an end as we watch Stu, Nick, Lloyd, and Larry figure out what the hell they're going to do next. We also meet a new character, the Trashcan Man, and finish this whole thing up with just a jaunt through the sunny old Lincoln Tunnel. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
So I think this might be, I think this is my favorite week of reading of this book, and it might be one of my favorite weeks of reading of any of the books we've covered on Kingslingers.
Wow, what a statement. Because
there's like 3 distinct chapters in this bit where I'm like, holy shit, that was a grand slam of a chapter. I mean, for those who know, one of my favorite authors is his real name is John McCrae. He does a lot of writing, and he's known for these interlude chapters, and some of the interlude chapters are just the best writing. And this was basically like 3 of those in 1 week, in terms of just being like a little self-contained short story with a kind of a, they're part of the larger story, obviously, but each of them kind of has its own beginning, middle, and end, and its own vibe that really struck me. And I feel like they're going to stay with me forever. I'll just say what I'm talking about is number 1, Trashcan Man, number 2, Lloyd in the jail cell, and number 3, the Lincoln Tunnel sequence. Those are what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think I like what you said. They all have a different vibe, because that's one of the things I'm picking up on the most this reading is just how different tonally and stylistically these chapters all feel to me. I think we kind of talked about this a couple weeks ago, but a Lloyd chapter feels like a Lloyd chapter. A Larry chapter feels like a Larry chapter. And I think you're absolutely right that the Trashcan Man chapter feels very distinct and unique and apart from a lot of the rest of this book. And I love that about it so much.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think that we're in a really weird place right now, though, right? Because I think the book is kind of at a threshold where the world has basically ended, right? But not completely, right? Our characters are not like in a position where they're like, okay, let's start to figure out what our lives in this new world are going to be. They're kind of in the middle of the end still, in this part where we don't really spend a lot of time with sick characters who are about to die in this week's reading. Most of those people are already gone. We're mostly just having characters in the immediate aftermath shell shock of the world ending, basically. And it's just a really interesting place to be in the grand scheme of the story.
Yeah, we're definitely in the middle of the end of the beginning of the story.
That's so true.
But no, I mean it is very cool how we have had these kind of distinctive phases of the book so far. And it does very much feel like we're still in the beginning of the story, right? Because the world hasn't quite finished ending, but maybe about now it is, right? We only now we have our immune people left, and that seems pretty meaningful.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, and I agree with you. This is great. We're going to talk about it when we get there, but the Lincoln Tunnel sequence is one of my favorite things ever. And it's remarkable. It's the thing that I'm so happy about is how it holds up. It's like it's a thing I read when I was a kid and it affected me and I will never forget it. And then you read it again now and I'm like, oh, holy shit. No, kid me was not an idiot as he normally was. This is great shit. And yeah, I'm with you on this. The book has gotten better and better and better to me each and every week we've been covering it.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's get into it. Just one more thing before we do that, though. We do have a reminder that our ongoing short fiction writing contest is still going on, right? We've got, I think, 3 more weeks technically where you get to submit your stories for cash prizes and fun things and all that stuff. So check the show notes of this very episode for the details on that, and then get writing, because man, these weeks are going by really fast, and it's gonna be done before we know it.
Yeah, I mean, cash prizes, but also, it's just fun to write sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Give it a try.
Absolutely. All right, we begin with chapter 29, and this is a stew chapter. And I think this is really interesting, Matt, because if you look back on basically the last 3 weeks, possibly the last 4 weeks, we basically start the book with Stu. We kind of just check in with him, see what he's up to, and then it's always kind of a shorter chapter, and then we leave him behind and go elsewhere. And I guess that makes sense, because Stu has kind of been stuck in one place for a while and just hasn't had a lot to do by the very nature of what his story has been in the book so far. But I just think it's really funny. It's like, all right, now our weekly Stu check-in, and then we'll move right along.
Yeah, that is funny. I mean, narrative-wise, we sort of just need to be reminded that Stu exists. Up until, because he's been basically, incarcerated for almost the entire book. So what's really going to happen with him? But now, this chapter gave me a strong feeling of like, okay, now his story really begins.
Right.
Because he escapes.
Yeah. And the fun thing is, where's that story going to go? We kind of have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
So Stu here in the beginning of this chapter is kind of serves as a witness to the end of the world, right? He notes that the government has basically given up finding a cure in his blood. They're not really doing any of that anymore. He watched the smokestacks in the factory. He can see through his window shut down and stop billowing smoke. He can see from his window that there are no cars, that there is nothing on the street, that there was a fire in a building and no one came to stop it, and it just kind of burned itself out. This is just Stu kind of sitting here removed from it all, watching the world end. And it's a very powerful image, I think, to start our week's chapters with.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a lot of there's a few different moments throughout these chapters where we see stuff like this, where it's just a sort of a poem describing the desolation, and it's great.
Yeah. And the other thing Stu is doing here is worried that this is his end as well, because we are introduced to a military man named Elder, that is clearly here just to wait around until he gets the order, and then he's going to kill Stu. That's what Stu firmly believes, and it turns out he is absolutely right. I just want to talk here for a minute how fucking absurd this is, right? That like the world is over, government, you've lost, You've absolutely failed to prevent the spread of this thing. You've even completely failed to prevent knowledge of this thing. And everybody knows it was you. And yet here is one of your final acts of control is going to be, we got to kill this dude because he knows about it. He's one of the 0.6% of the population of the world that is going to survive this thing. And we got to take him out for no reason.
It's I agree, obviously, like it's super infuriating. I think this week is the first time that I kind of pushed past that immediate emotional reaction of just being like, this just makes me so mad, into like, okay, so what are we doing here, right? So it's like, it's about pride, it's about honor, in a sense, that they're willing to kill the last hope of humanity to protect their pride and maybe their honor. And that's an interesting kind of statement about humanity. And I wonder if we're going to do more with that,
Sure.
Because this is more of a stretch, but you could say that one of Larry's problems is pride in a certain sense. And maybe, that's his struggle. I don't really know yet. I don't think there's enough here for us to go on yet, but
sure.
It's an interesting choice, right? It's an interesting and intentional choice. I also wanted to just, I don't know, I don't have a strong point here other than I think the name Elder is really interesting.
Sure. Yeah.
Particular, right? Because it sort of has some religious connotations to it. It kind of reminds me of Eldred Jonas, our, antagonist for one of the Dark Tower novels. And, he's a really minor character, right? But, normally Stephen King names are pretty, Johnny, Stevie, So Eldred just really jumped out to me.
No, I think you're right. I think he's meant to,
or Elder, sorry.
Yeah, he's meant to kind of come off as weird and uncomfortable from the get. And I think that the name certainly helps that. He's just this mysterious unnamed. We learn nothing about him. We know nothing about him. We know that he's the guy that is going to continue to follow orders even when it stops making sense to follow orders. And that is exactly what he does.
Yep.
I really like this part right here where Stu is kind of figuring out, he knows Elder's going to kill him eventually, but he doesn't know what to do about it. And it says, Stu was sure that a hero in a television program or a novel could have thought of a way to escape. Hell, even some people in real life, but he wasn't one of them. I'm always kind of mildly fascinated by authors' tendency to do this thing where they have their characters go, yeah, I'm sure a character in a book would know exactly what to do in the situation, but that's not me. And then you, the reader, are like, no, but it is though. But it is though. I think it's really funny because on the one hand, I think it's very true to life, and it's a accurate feeling that I think we've all had in our lives. It was like, man, if my life was a book, a lot of what is happening right now would make sense, and I would have the ability to overcome this thing that I'm going through. But it's not a book, and therefore I can't. I think it's a very human reaction to have, but it strikes me as funny how often I see authors make characters in books have that specific reaction.
It is the first time I can think of Stephen King doing it specifically. Although maybe I'm just
outside the extreme meta-ness of the characters acknowledging that they're characters in the Dark Tower.
Right. But I think it works particularly well in this book because it's a very grounded book. It's very procedural. We're constantly, the book is constantly causing us to ask ourselves, how would you handle this? Bearing in mind, like, you're not going to handle it well. You're going to be freaked out. You're going to be traumatized. You're going to be really uncertain about what the right thing to do is. And so having a character sort of ask themselves those questions feels right to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree for sure. Stu thinks about Watership Down at this moment. Matt, he another Richard Adams reference that we Dark Tower folks will probably find delightful here. Specifically, Stu is thinking of going Tharn, which is a word the rabbits in that book use to explain that phenomenon of an animal being paralyzed by fear, by sitting in the middle of the road as headlights beat down on it and not moving. And the connection here is that Stu thinks that just the presence of Elder is enough to make Stu go Tharn. I just love this specific reference here. I love when King does this.
Well, yeah. I mean, we got Watership Down references. We got Lord of the Rings references later this week. All we're missing is a Lord of the Flies reference. And then we'd have the trifecta for, Stephen King references that are in everything.
I mean, this is definitely a story that it would be ripe for some sort of Lord of the Flies reference. We haven't seen it yet.
I bet it's coming. I love this concept of Tharn and how I'd never heard that word before, or I'd never read Watership Down. So
I still haven't either. We really need to read that book, Matt.
Seriously. But yeah, I love how succinctly it describes a particular notion of like a survivor or the opposite of a survivor. Like if you've gone Tharn, then you're not going to make it. And I think, it's funny because I didn't have that word last week, but I think the shape of the concept that I was gesturing at when I said that Rita wasn't going to make it is like, I think Rita has gone Tharn. Like Rita is sort of on the verge of being paralyzed by the situation instead of actually acting. And that's how I was feeling last week. And I feel like, it's a little bit complicated, but some of what we see, I think, does play into this idea of people going Tharn. And despite the fact that they could easily survive, right? That's kind of the key thing about the concept is that like you could get out of the situation, but what actually ends up killing you is your own fear. I think that's the important aspect here.
No, I think you're totally right. And that Rita connection is beautiful. And I think what we see of her this week only reinforces that to me for sure. I just, before we move on from this, I really just want to talk generally about this thing that we've been seeing in these books since the very beginning, which is how Stephen King writes about people experiencing books. And this is the scene where we have Stu thinking back about Watership Down, and he goes on this kind of long tangent about how he's never really been a reader. He doesn't have the patience for it, and he's kind of too slow of a reader to really do it. and yet he started leafing through this book that I think he bought for a niece or something, right? He bought for a present for someone else, and started leafing through it when he was bored, and found himself immediately transfixed by it, to the point where he spent the next 3 days basically reading nonstop and finished it. I just love the way King writes about reading. You can tell, like, through every bit of it, that he is a person who not only enjoys writing and creating stories, but just loves reading and the act of reading. It's such a powerful, important thing to him that he's so convinced in its wonder and magic that he even has characters who aren't readers kind of transfixed by the power of reading. Like, it's one thing to have Bobby Garfield, a kid who is kind of set up from the beginning to be a reader, watch as he's transfixed by novels, but he does it even with characters like Stu, who aren't big book guys. Still bow down to the power of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, I love it, actually. It kind of endears you to Stu.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, just make sure that you love him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun trick, because you can make the assumption that a person reading this big 1,100 page novel is probably a pretty big reader. And so making a character like wax poetically about the power of reading makes you like them, because you identify with them as a person actively reading right that very minute. So it's a fun little trick you got there, Stephen.
Yeah, right. I mean, anybody who picks up a novel this thick, you can assure yourself that you're going to be able to relate to them on that level, right?
Yeah, definitely. So Stu thinks he's going Tharn around Elder, but we see here that, not totally Tharn, because Elder walks in the room by himself, and it's very clear to Stu immediately that he's here to kill him, and Stu is ready for him. He swings a chair at him after doing the old "look that way" trick, which works somehow. He then proceeds to beat the shit out of this military man, eventually shooting him to death. He escapes his room and wanders the hospital, seeing that basically everyone is dead. He meets one person that is still alive, that is like on the cusp of being dead. But that's it. Everyone else is dead here. So it's pretty powerful sequence there, Matt.
I love the sequence. For me, it kind of presages, I don't know how to say that word, kind of anticipates the tunnel sequence from later, right? It's a person kind of going through an enclosed space that's full of the dead, and it is really intense, actually, but it's not nearly as intense as the later tunnel sequence. And it kind of shows us a side of Stu that we haven't seen before, because like he seemed really kind of stoic to me, like just unflappable. And I mean, no human being can actually remain unflappable through this situation. So it's it's very realistic, and like you don't think any less of him. But yeah, no, it's a really intense sequence.
Yeah, and I think anyone that has been in one of these, large hospital complexes that they make these days definitely empathizes with this moment where we're wandering around and unsure of where to go, right? Because those places are confusing, and like he says in the book, they do have kind of signs and arrows constantly pointing you towards where you want to go. And yet it still feels overwhelming and maze-like.
Yeah, for sure.
But I like that as a metaphor too, right? I mean, Stu has kind of escaped his capture at this point. He's free now here at the end of the world. And he's like in a position of, where do I go next? What do I do? And I think the maze of the hospital is this really great little metaphor for, trying to figure out what's the right way out? Where should I go? What should I do now? And that's a question we don't really get to see Stu answer quite yet, but it's definitely on our minds.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, it is an interesting ending point. I guess that's a pretty logical ending point, because he doesn't really know what's going to happen next, and neither do we.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, right. This is something I want to talk about here, though, because, we have all these moving pieces, and so far in the book, it's been, okay, well, there's the super flu out and it's going to kill everyone, except now we know that there are survivors, and all the survivors we've met so far seem to be our characters. And so we have this clear idea of who these characters are, but we don't have there's no I guess mission statement of the novel, what happens next, right? Like, where are they going? What are they going to do? What's the conflict going to be? Like, what's the struggles? Like, we don't know any of this, right? We're at this place where the big inciting incident is the virus, and that's winding down, it seems. And then it's like, okay, now what is the rest of this book? We've got I don't know, 800 more pages to go. What's the rest of the story?
Right. I mean, some vague idea of an antagonist in Flag, but like, okay, but what does he want?
Yeah.
Like the world's ended. What could he possibly want?
And what could he do? Like what does his antagonism look like?
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, we have the hint that there's some kind of shining thing going on. And that, I think that's the closest thing we have toward it, like an arrow. And that's very vague, right? In fact, if I hadn't sort of absorbed information about the story, I probably would have like forgotten about that, right?
Sure.
So yeah, no, that's you're right though. It's it's a really interesting way to do a story. But I think it makes sense because it's putting us in the position of the characters where it's like why would they have any idea what they're going to do? The closest thing we have to a person with a plan is, Larry, who's like, I guess we can like go down the coast and find a house to stay in
and just live, I guess. Yeah. Just like live our lives, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of wild. All right, so from here we move on to chapter 30, which is a very short single-pager chapter, and it's one where we briefly return to the beginning. We return to the place all this started. We are in Arnette, Texas, but now it is dead. There is nothing left. There is barely anything alive. And Matt, I think the writing here is just really, really wonderful. And I'm going to read a bit of it for you. Cats did not catch the flu, and dozens of them wove in and out of the twilight stillness like smoky shades. From several houses, the sound of television snow ran on and on. A random shutter banged back and forth. A red wagon, old and faded and rusty, the words Speedaway Express barely legible on its side, stood in the middle of Durgin Street in front of the Indian Head Tavern. There were a number of returnable beer and soda bottles in the wagon. On Logan Lane in Arnette's best neighborhood, wind chimes played on the porch of Tony Leominster's house. Tony's Scout stood in the driveway, its window open. A family of squirrels had nested in the back seat. The sun deserted Arnette. The town grew dark under the wing of the night. The town was, except for the chirr and whisper of small animals and the tinkle of Tony Leominster's wind chimes, silent and silent and silent. It's incredibly evocative language here, right?
I love it.
I love it so much. It's one page out of 1,100, but this is one that's going to stick in your brain, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just the language, even after your eyes leave the words, you kind of keep echoing in your mind and silent and silent. And it's like, it's silent forever. He doesn't say that, but it leaves you with that strong impression.
Yeah. And I love the beats of life still, right? Like dogs are dead, right? We know that dogs catch it. We know that guinea pigs catch it based on them putting the guinea pig in Stu's room. But we see here cats do not. We see a family of squirrels nesting in the back seat of a car. So like it's this really little bit of life goes on, but it is a completely different kind of life.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also think it's a good choice to use all of these, proper nouns. I mean, Stephen King is the master of rooting you in place using proper nouns, and just scanning through this: Speedway Express, Durgin Street, Head Tavern, Logan Lane, Arnette, Tony Leominster, Tony's Scout.
Yeah,
all of these specific words connecting you to a specific human being, a specific place, specific street, right? That connects you to it in a way where just saying like, we now find some random, car in the back lot of some random house on some random street, right?
Yeah. It's a place. It's a real place. It was a lived in place, and it isn't anymore, and it never will be again. Yeah, I think the 3 beat of and silent, I think you're absolutely right, carries on it some mood of perpetuity, right? That this is not a temporary thing. This is not, it's abandoned now, but human life will come back to this place and bring back noise with it. No, it's just, this is the way it's going to be now.
Yep. I love it.
So we move on to chapter 31. This is a Randall Flagg chapter, sort of, because we actually begin the chapter in the head and mind of Christopher Bradenton, who is a guy that was very offhandedly mentioned in that previous Flagg chapter. We learn here at the very beginning that Bradenton is sick with Captain Trips, laying in bed and in his fevered haze, remembering his past. Flagg mentioned in the last chapter that Bradenton was an activist who had gotten in trouble with the law due to the extremity of his activism in the past, and that he is now a person who helps fugitives from the government travel and hide across the country. He's kind of running a fugitive underground railroad, if you will.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This chapter is one of the few places in the story where we really focus on the delirium aspect of Captain Trips. Maybe only the second time in the story that we've actually seen the experience of having the disease described from the inside. If I had to guess, I'd say it's the last time, because pretty much everybody's dead after this point. So, which is just kind of an interesting choice.
No, that's so true, because for the most part, the majority of our point of view characters have been people immune for very specific reasons, because they are the characters that will go on to tell the story after everyone else is dead. But so we haven't really gotten a lot of time in the head of a person sick with it, at least in the final stages of their sickness, as it seems like Christopher is here.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to enunciate that because it's called Captain Trips basically because it makes you act like you're on drugs.
Yeah, you're tripping. Yeah.
But the funny thing is we've seen relatively little of that. Like, we've seen a lot of people just kind of dropping dead. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to point out, like, we really get to see the delirium and hallucinations from the inside here.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see here that one of Bradenton's delirious hallucinations is of the Democratic National Convention of 1968, where, if you don't know your American history, folks, this is where a huge protest was planned against the government for a lot of different things. It was the 60s, and the police decided to beat the ever-living shit out of the protesters. And then the U.S. government did this fun thing where it put the organizers of the protest on trial for inciting that violence, despite, their own internal reports saying that the police acted with completely unnecessary aggression. Typical stuff in America. Great. They found them guilty too, by the way. That's the trial of the Chicago 7. They found them guilty. They went to jail. For the police beating people up.
And I never learned about that in high school, so I assume that's all made up, and that you're just...
You're right. It never happened. Happened. Right. Yeah. I do really like the writing here, though, as Kit's kind of fever dream. Kit is his nickname, we learn here as well. Kind of fades in and out. I love this here where it says, and he was back in Chicago. The year was 1968. Somewhere voices were chanting, the whole world was watching. The whole world was watching. The whole world... And there was a girl lying in the gutter by the entrance to the park, her body clad in overall jeans, her feet bare, her long hair full of glass fragments, her face a glittering mask of blood that was black in the heartless white glow of the streetlights, the mask of a crushed insect. He helped her to her feet, and she screamed and shrank against him because an outer space monster was advancing out of the drifting gas, a creature clad in shining black boots and a flak jacket and a wall-eyed gas mask, holding a truncheon in one hand, a can of mace in the other, and grinning. And when the outer space monster pushed its mask back, revealing its grinning, flaming face, they had both screamed, because it was somebody or something he had been waiting for, the man Kit Bradenton had always been terrified of. It had been the walking dude. Bradenton's screams have shattered the fabric of that dream like a high sea shatters fine crystal. I don't know. There's something that imagery, once again in King's writing, it's just incredibly evocative to me. Like we recreate a scene from the riots and from the police action, and then we put this monster in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's beautifully visual. The description of the woman in the overalls and mask of a crushed insect and all this stuff. It's also, it was interesting to me because, and maybe I'm just reading wrong and you can correct me, but it's written in such a vivid yet chaotic, feverish way that I really can't tell what of this actually happened. Like, what is a memory versus what is a hallucination. Maybe it's all just supposed to be a memory that's just coming upon him in his delirium, but some of it seems a little exaggerated in a way that feels dreamlike.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're supposed to feel that way. No, I don't think you read it wrong. Is this the first time Kit found Randall Flagg? Maybe. Or is this just Flagg kind of invading? Because we kind of see here that he jumps around in his visions here, and Flagg kind of invades each and every one of them. Because he goes to a little bit later where he's having an affair with a young man, and Flagg kind of comes into that vision as well, as he becomes the face of that young man he was with. And it could be. I don't know. I think it's supposed to feel kind of delirious and not entirely, cohesive.
Yeah.
Logically.
But it works, right? You're following what you're meant to be following, right? It's not confusing in a bad way. It's just I was wondering, Is this a memory? Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
we
No.
get it.
Yeah, I get it. And so it's into this fever dream that Randall Flagg literally appears, not just in the dreams itself. And we see here that I think, we met him in the last chapter last week, but that was a very kind of removed chapter where we were kind of just seeing him react to feeling things and getting a little bit of backstory on him. This is him interacting with people. And I think we see here that he's kind of having a little fun, isn't he? I mean, he's like screaming funny noises. He's tossing buckets of water on Kit. He's then hovering over his bed just for fun. He's just having a grand old time here. He's a little goofy here, right?
I mean, he's even goofier than your average Flagg is goofy, right? Flagg kind of loves to mug for the camera. But this guy, like the audiobook reader is also making some choices with this one. A Southern accent for one thing.
Oh, interesting.
Not something I was expecting from Flagg. I kind of like it though.
No, that's really interesting.
Because you're like, why not? Like,
sure. Yeah.
Like he's got to have some kind of accent.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we see here that Flagg is here to collect some papers and a car that Kit was supposed to have for him. And after forcing where all the information on where this stuff is out of the dying man, he just leaves him here to die horribly.
Yeah. Does he leave or does he kind of hurry him along? I wasn't entirely sure.
I think he kind of accelerates a little bit. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing to me, I'm like, why the hell does he even need papers? Like, does he not understand the situation yet? I mean, it's unclear, I guess.
It's interesting, right? Because I think you could make the argument, well, he's just asking for the papers because he's fucking with Kit, right? He doesn't actually need the papers anymore. Maybe he does. I don't think we actually know what Kit was helping him with.
Yeah.
But so then you could say the argument is, oh, really? He just wanted the car. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. There's fucking cars everywhere. Like there's we see in this chapter specifically that thousands of people died on the road while trying to get out of wherever they were, so that the roads and highways are just littered with cars filled with corpses that he could just yank one out and take. I think it's really, I think he's just doing it to fuck with this guy. I really think that's what it is. It's like he made this guy do this stuff for him, and he's coming here, before he kind of figures out what he's going to do next. He's going to finish the last mission he was on, and he's just going to do one final fuck with this guy before he comes up with what his next plan is, as this thing he's feeling is kicking into motion.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a good chance that is correct. It's just funny to him to insist on having proper license and registration for his specific car.
Yeah.
And despite knowing that it doesn't matter.
Yeah, better make sure this is under the name Randall Flagg, or, oh gosh, I could get a ticket.
Yeah, it's hilarious. I mean, so it's interesting because I mentioned this only because I haven't really gotten this vibe from other Flagg iterations, but he really has some Heath Ledger Joker vibes. You can imagine this being the kind of wacky Joker thing that specific Joker would do, And I guess I'm just really enjoying that, I mean, obviously it's not a direct comparison in any way, but once the comparison occurred to me, especially the way he's hopping around and kind of being weirdo, once the comparison occurred to me, I really kind of kept thinking about it. So
no, I think that's fair for sure. He's having a really good time. He's really enjoying life right now. It's a really good time to be Randall Flagg.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we see here that, like the rest of our characters, Randall is not sure where to go next, right? He's got his car. He sees that everyone is dying and that it's what he calls, quote, my lucky night. But he doesn't know where to go. And part of the end of this chapter is him deciding where to go. And I say this only to reinforce this idea that the Flagg, as we're presented in this book, is not some all-powerful, all-knowing whatever, right? He's an opportunist with some magical powers. And I think it's really interesting how little he seems to actually know about what's going on.
I mean, if anything, he comes off as remarkably uninformed.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't, he this is different from the Randall Flagg we've seen, right? I think the Randall Flagg that had a palaver with Roland at the end of The Gunslinger seemed to know more than anyone else. If you go back and read The Gunslinger, knowing how The Dark Tower ends, it seems that he knows that Roland has been on this loop before, right? Like that he is fully cognizant of the wider world of the Dark Tower and what's going on in the Dark Tower. And this Randall Flagg barely even knows what's going on in his world.
Yeah, he just seems to be navigating by instinct all the time, almost.
Yeah, definitely. So the chapter ends with Flagg deciding where he's heading, but interestingly enough, the book does not tell us. He just drives, it just says south. I think he's in Colorado, and it just says he heads south. So there you go. Wherever he's going, we don't know yet, but right. that's the end of the chapter. Cool. I think you probably know yet, Matt, because like you probably culturally like have absorbed this part, but we'll save it. We'll save it.
But I don't know why, and I don't know anything. Like I really, it's similar to like I have heard the name Trashcan Man, but I have no idea. I mean, I knew nothing beyond like, yeah, there's a guy.
There's a character named Trashcan Man.
Yeah, right. So.
I'm sure it was exactly what you were imagining.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, so we move on to chapter 32, where we meet up with Lloyd a few days later. And you were totally right, Matt. The end of the world seems like it's going to be a really good way to avoid the death penalty if you're, of course, immune to the thing that's killing everyone. Only, it's a problem, Matt. He's still locked in a jail cell, and he doesn't have a Nick Andros that's going to let him out. So he's just kind of stuck there.
Yeah. So, I mean, this might actually be my favorite chapter. I mean, I love, like I said,
that's really interesting.
The other two I loved as well, but like, I think what it is, it feels like a short story, and it kind of builds, and it kind of doesn't tell you where it's going. You have to figure it out, or maybe you figure it out just before Lloyd figures it out, or yeah, like it's really solid, and I was really kind of like riveted the whole time.
That's great. Yeah. Now, I never would have listed this as one of my favorite chapters in this book, but no, I think you're totally right. Awesome. I really enjoyed it on this reread.
All right.
So we see here that Lloyd is sitting cross-legged on the floor of his cell. Both of his hands were slimed with blood. He looked like a man who has drawn on a pair of red gloves. So, I mean, this is pretty obvious imagery, right? Like he has blood on his hands, Matt. He has blood on his hands.
He has blood on his hands. He's
been caught red-handed.
And
he's got blood on his hand. Yeah, I mean, I this is obviously a very, very transparent metaphor, but I do like it as like the last time we left Lloyd, he was discussing with his lawyer about how none of this was actually his fault, right? That it was all Poke, and it was Poke that was doing all this, and he was just this hapless victim that was like brought into it, and that's how he's going to beat the system, is he's going to make it seem like it was all this guy's idea and not his, and that's the way they're going to win. And then we open up this chapter with him covered in blood on his hands. He is guilty, right? Like perhaps it's true that Poke killed most of the people, and perhaps it's true that Poke was kind of leading Lloyd on, but he's responsible. He's responsible for what he did and what they did, and I think the book's making that clear here.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it's worth repeating, right? Because Lloyd is kind of likable in kind of a hapless idiot fashion.
Sure.
And so you can imagine like, oh, it's just so hard to keep hating him, but like give a few little reminders here that he's, he's a bad dude.
Yeah. So Lloyd's hands are red, not just for metaphorical reasons, Matt. For plot reasons, they're red because he's been spending the last day or so slowly working at unscrewing the bolts of his cot's leg with his bare hands, and it's just chewing up his fingers terribly. And I don't know about you, but my immediate reaction to this, both the first time I read it and again today, was, well, what the fuck are you going to do there, Lloyd? Like, what are you going to do with a cot leg? Why are you hurting yourself so much to get this cot leg? And I think it's really reassuring when the book finally has him succeed in getting that last bolt, and he holds up the leg and is like, oh, this does nothing. What do I do with this? I can't do anything with this.
I've ruined my bed for no gain. Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. It's dumb, but it's also the kind of thing you can imagine you would do in such a situation, because like there's nothing you can do, but you're like, oh, there's a loose bolt. Well, better work on that. Why? Because there's a loose bolt.
Yeah, because it's there. Yeah,
and I'm going to go insane otherwise.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I like it. It's so dumb, but it's perfect Lloyd, right? Because I think you're absolutely right that um, it's just something for him to do, and it's some way for him to take control of the situation he's in.
Yep.
So Lloyd recounts Captain Tripp's blowing its way through the prison, and I really love the detail here, Matt, of the one other alive prisoner that he sees at the beginning of this chapter is just a guy who's like screaming the word mother over and over again, like calling out to his mother. And I love this because we've been talking the last couple weeks about this very clear, I think, parent-child dynamic that's going on in this movie. Like parents and children and how these relationships work seem really key to a lot of what this book's doing. And we have this poor lone guy in the prison, one of only two left, it seems, just screaming mother over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love it. I agree that it connects this section with everything else because Lloyd himself isn't really thinking about parent stuff. So it's an element that just ties it in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't know a lot about Lloyd's family, right? I think we get a little tiny bit about his father in this book as this chapter, I mean, as he recounts the story with the rabbit, but he doesn't seem, obviously it's annoying to him, but I wonder if it's annoying to him in a more specific way, these calls out for this person's mother.
Yeah, maybe, right? Like it's reminding him of his mother and he doesn't want to be reminded of that. He doesn't think about it, but there's a lot that Lloyd doesn't think about. In fact, that's almost like the title of this chapter is like the things that are evident to us as the reader, but which Lloyd is not thinking about. And I don't think it's because he's not realizing them. I think it's a very intentional sort of, he doesn't want to think about this. And so he's not.
Yeah. So Lloyd kind of tells the story of the last few days, kind of the guards starting to come less and less frequently, the carting of sick inmates out of their prison cells by the bunches, and then eventually everything fading to them stop coming at all. And then there's this yelling and hollering for food in the prison, and Lloyd kind of has to sit there as that eventually quiets itself down as more and more people die, and it gets quieter and quieter, and it's just them. For whatever reason, I don't know why my mind went here, but I related this to the Titanic movie where you have all the survivors floating in the water, and at the very beginning it's all loud and they're screaming for help, and then the survivors like slowly hear that sound fade until it's just a few people and then silence. And I think there's something very, very powerful and horrifying about just the cacophony of life struggling as it slows and quiets down to nothing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's such a dreadful scenario that for me, as I was reading it, I think it took me quite a while to really grasp the situation because I think that I kept thinking like, okay, so we're leading up to the explanation, like this is going to be the chapter where some guard happens along and lets Lloyd out of his cell. And it's like, no. And then eventually I was like, oh, nobody's going to let him out. Oh shit. Yeah. Like, and cause that's actually such a nightmare situation. Maybe it like taps into some phobia of mine or something to be like left in a cage. That I like didn't even want to consider that a possibility until the book really is like, yep, that's the direction we're going.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that it would be totally horrifying to just know that no one's coming. Like, what are you going to do? How are you going to get out of here? And we don't know, right? We leave Lloyd in this chapter without knowing. Is he going to get out? Is he just going to waste away in here? We don't know.
Yeah.
I really like how Lloyd kind of reads the room and actually starts squirreling away food pretty early on in this whole process. He like just sees what's happening and is like, oh, I might need some of this food. I'm going to start saving it. And I think it's really interesting because one of the things we said about Lloyd last week was, hey, this guy's pretty dumb. He doesn't seem to know what's going on very much. And maybe this is a signal that, man, maybe he's not as dumb as he puts on, right? Maybe some of that is affect. And like a way he's been able to live his life.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense that some of his speech is affected just because it's kind of extreme, something like he's being a bit of a clown, actually. But also, I think also he is a dumb guy. But like, I think there's a certain kind of intelligence that emerges when like survival is at stake.
Sure.
And I think that's part of what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I also wonder if it's part of the fact that, he seems like the type of person, and I'm judging this solely on his interactions with Poke, but he seems like the type of person who, in a situation where someone is a much more take command, go getter guy, he is the type that's just going to fall in line and just like, be the follower. And so right now he's in a situation where he doesn't have that person, right? He doesn't have someone to just sign on and say, yes, sir, no, sir, I will do whatever you want, sir. So he's forced to kind of be on his own, and we see a smarter, maybe not the right word, but more competent version of himself in a situation where he doesn't have that person.
That's a really good point. And that immediately makes me wonder what happens when and if he runs into Randall Flagg. Because that guy,
I don't want to completely lead you on, but I think that's something the book wants you to be thinking about, I think.
Because definitely he would make, like, that's the thing, is you get the sense, I've had the sense that Lloyd wasn't necessarily doomed to be a monster and a villain. He could have been rehabilitated if he met the right people, but I just and I am honestly not speaking from like osmosis knowledge here. I just feel like what we're going to do with this guy is we're going to have him fall into the thrall of Randall Flagg, and he's going to do some heinous shit.
Sure.
That's my expectation.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I think he's a type of character, I think you're right, that can go either way depending on who he runs into.
Yeah.
And we'll see.
Yeah.
So once Lloyd and Mother Screamer are the only two left in the prison, Lloyd starts seriously thinking about starvation, and it unlocks in him a story from his past. One of the rare moments we get to see Lloyd talk about his past, and it's a very interesting little story here, Matt.
It is. Just before we move on to the story, you here kind of alluded to the Mother Screamer, Monster Screamer parallel to
Sure.
to what's happening in the Larry chapters.
Mm-hmm.
That is something I wanted to at least point out. I mean, other than the fact that it's a clever parallel, I don't know what to do with it exactly. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just interesting, the ways in which we see people reacting to the end, right? Like, one person calls out for his mother, another person is absolutely convinced the monsters are coming, and the way characters react to them, I think is, and you're absolutely right. Like, one of the things we've been doing in this book a lot is drawing parallels between characters through imagery. We talked about the scene transition with the strawberry pie last week. Like, that is imagery specifically designed to connect two characters together. And I think perhaps this is another example of that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So the story about the rabbit, we learned that when he was a kid, Lloyd won a rabbit in a school raffle. But when he was supposed to be taking care of it, it turns out it, quote, slipped his mind for 2 weeks, and he just forgot to feed it. And by the time he realized that he forgot, it was too late. He goes into the shed where he kept the rabbit and finds it there dead. And the writing here, man. The fur he had liked so much to stroke was matted and dirty. White maggots crawled busily in their sockets that had once held his rabbit's pretty pink eyes. The rabbit's paws were ragged and bloody. He tried to tell himself the paws were bloody because he had tried to scratch its way out of the cage, and that was undoubtedly how it had happened. But some sick, dark part of his mind spoke up in a whisper that said that maybe the rabbit, in the final extremity of its hunger, had tried to eat itself. So, Matt, what does the story say about Lloyd? Why are we relating the story about Lloyd in this moment, besides the obvious parallel of he is the rabbit trapped in the cage?
Yeah, not only the rabbit trapped in the cage, but the rabbit trapped in the cage with red hands, and he's dead, and he's afraid he's going to die. Like, it's great. But okay, so more meta though. Like, it's interesting to me because it is totally an accident that the rabbit dies. Like, Lloyd is just genuinely not capable of existing in this complicated world and functioning without sort of accidentally doing horrific damage to the people and things around him, like this poor rabbit that, like, he loved the rabbit, right? He wished no ill on the rabbit. So it's a tragedy, right? It sort of says something tragic and sad about this character, that this was he was almost doomed just due to his own nature, right?
Yeah, and I think that really parallels with the Trashcan Man that we're going to see in a couple chapters, right? These are characters that are not like inherently evil, right? They're just people that have either gotten in with the wrong crowd or are missing key parts of themselves that allow them to make better decisions. And there is no maliciousness. I think it's really interesting when you look back at Lloyd's introductory chapter. They do terrible things. They do awful things. But it doesn't seem like Lloyd is ever malicious about it. It seems like Poke is. Poke enjoys inflicting violence on people. He enjoys hurting people. Lloyd is just kind of like, yeah, okay, sure. Like, I mean, I think it's fun to be an outlaw is the thing he says. Like, it's fun to do these things. It's fun to imagine yourself as this person. But we don't, I think, ever, and maybe I'm speaking wrongly, and if I am, please correct me, but I don't think we ever see Lloyd like take pleasure in the pain or misfortune of other people, despite the fact that he is consistently inflicting it.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I remember distinctly that he kind of was uncomfortable when that one guy was suffocating on the tape.
Yeah.
And then he kind of got over it really quickly. But you know, for a minute there, it was the opposite of him. You know, relishing watching the guy suffer and die.
Yeah, definitely. So the chapter ends with Lloyd killing a rat in the opposite cell and then going to grab it and putting it away for later. Just he says, if it becomes necessary, if I run out of other food, I'll have the rat just if it becomes necessary. And that is where we leave our Lloyd, right?
That's where we leave him. And it's such a great moment. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this because this is, if this is an implication, it's an entirely unspoken implication, but like the implication being, yeah, he got the dead rat, but also there's a dead human right there in the next cell. Maybe a little bit hard to reach, but nonetheless full of nutritious protein. Better get at it before it spoils, Lloyd.
Yeah. Without, specifically pointing to anything that's going to happen in the future, I do feel like the book lays that implication at your feet.
Let me put it this way: if I wasn't supposed to take that from the story, then I think I like the chapter about 5 to 10% less, just because I feel like the thrust of this whole short story was leading up to the moment where Lloyd realizes what he's probably going to have to do. And he doesn't, and this is what I mean when I say like refusing to think about things, because he doesn't actually think that to himself.
Yeah. He just takes the rat, and like that's the part he'll justify to himself in the moment is, well, if I have to, I'll eat this rat. And I think the unspoken implication there is, well, what else will you do if you have to?
Right. Yep.
All right, so we leave Lloyd behind and we do chapter 33, which is a pretty brief, short Nick chapter that does not go well for our friend Nick Andros, Matt. The chapter starts, though, with Nick reading a Gothic novel about a frightened governess who thought the lonely estate where she was supposed to be teaching the handsome master's son was haunted. This is really interesting, Matt, because this is one of those moments where an analyst podcaster brain like wanted to go into overdrive and really read more into this than I think I can, because the description of this novel sounds close to Henry James' The Turn of the Screw, but not entirely. In that book, the governess is there to take care of a boy and a girl child. They are not the children of the person who hires them, but their uncle, because the kid's parents have died. So it's not The Turn of the Screw. And I'm not like super well versed in my Gothic fiction, so it's very possible this is a reference to a specific Gothic novel. But I was thinking about that and I was like, well, when King is going to make a literary reference in his books, he usually just makes it, right? Like he doesn't just allude vaguely to another novel. He just says he was reading The Lord of the Flies and just makes it. So this could very well also just be King kind of yada-yadaing something suitably Gothic sounding, which I think is done almost entirely from mood, because I think Gothic fits the mood of this chapter pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. I was going to ask if this is like a Shirley Jackson novel or something, but no, I think you're right that it's really just sort of the mood, and maybe he's consciously being like, we don't need a specific reference here. That would just be distracting.
It is not The Haunting of Hill House for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Which is one of King's favorite novels. So you would think he's going to do a Gothic novel reference. He would definitely go with Hill House, but he doesn't here. It's definitely not. The setup of that novel is very different from what is described here.
Yeah. All right.
So suddenly the lights go out because we're in a gothic novel now.
Mm-hmm.
The town has lost power, and then suddenly the ghost of Ray Booth, the man that punched his teeth out at the beginning of the story, appears. Okay, it's not his ghost, Matt. It's actually him. It's the real dude who spent the last week hiding out in the woods around the town and finally got hungry enough to come back in and once again behave in an entirely rational way, which is get revenge for something that doesn't matter anymore because the world has ended. And in conclusion, people are stupid.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. So yeah, I mean, we really do have that pattern, right? We have Nick here, we had Stu previously, and in a sense, Lloyd also, all having to deal with the world actively trying to kill them. Not just the virus, but like people actually trying to kill them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's messed up.
Yes, Matt, it is pretty messed up. And so Nick and Booth fight for a while, and Nick barely manages to kill the man, but in the process, he loses an eye. He gets his eye poked out by Booth, and we see here, "You fixed me," he told the dead man. "First my teeth and now my eye. Are you happy? You would have taken both eyes if you could have done it, wouldn't you? Taken my eyes and left me deaf, dumb, and blind in a world of the dead. How do you like this, homeboy?" It's awful, right? Like,
yeah.
We already have a guy who can't hear, who can't speak, and then you take half of his other sense away from him.
It's so mean, man.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, King usually stays on one side of the line, but like this is so mean to me. I'm just like, why, man? I like Nick is so like innocent and good,
yeah,
and we're just beating on him like consistently.
Uh-huh.
Oh God, like I really hope we don't like break Nick, you know, like the story doesn't just keep piling on him until he just breaks, you know, because
yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like that's where we're heading at this point. I think you're right, but it is interesting to this is one of those moments that I know for a fact that this chapter was not in the original novel, that this was one of the cut chapters, which is really interesting because Nick definitely like shows up later in the novel with an eye missing. That is definitely a thing that happens in the book, but we don't actually get to see the event of it happening. I think King just kind of yada yadas it as like an accident that happened on the road or something, which is interesting because this is very specific and very, related specifically to the thing that started this whole journey for him, which was these guys beat him up for seemingly no reason. And then one like comes back at the very end for even less of a reason to get his final bit of revenge, which is taking half of one of Nick's few remaining senses.
Yeah, that's weird. I guess you got to deal with it some way if you're going to cut it out. And it does seem like it's going to be important that we have this character who has this narrow window into the world.
Yeah, very narrow. That's for sure. All right, Matt. We move on to our penultimate chapter of the week, chapter 34. In which we are introduced to the Trashcan Man, aka Donald Merwin Elbert. And before we get into the details, I just got to know your overall reaction to this guy. Like, this is one of, I think, the more interesting character choices for Stephen King. I mean, not even in this novel, just broadly.
Super, super unique, right? I think maybe my favorite character introduction ever for Stephen King, at least. Love the way it was written. It feels inspired, if you know what I mean by that. Like, it feels so different from anything else he's written that it feels like it must have been a stroke of inspiration. And, we've got these interspersed hallucinated voices. We've got this feverish unreality. We've got all of these like big themes of the story and of the specific character that are just through everything. God, it's fantastic.
I'm so glad you like this. Yeah, it's so weird, but in the best possible way.
Yeah.
So as you said, we meet Trashy as a man hearing voices. He's hearing voices of the dead and of his past talking to him. We learn he's a pyromaniac. He likes to set fires in trash cans, hence the name. And he's a deeply, deeply unwell person.
Yeah, I mean, he's pyromaniac. He's also, schizophrenic. He's also quite badly traumatized by his upbringing on top of that.
By every,
Just loading it on.
And I love this because like his brain doesn't function well enough to even recognize it as trauma, but it obviously is, right? Like the way the book relates the fact that his dad murdered his entire family and like would have murdered him if not for the gun backfiring,
Mm-hmm.
like, is just so completely without emotion. And yet, it's like this horrible experience that probably scarred him for life. And yet his brain doesn't work well enough to even recognize that as a fact anymore. And I just love the way the text gets this across to you without relying on the emotions of the character, because he can't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and he certainly wasn't helped to deal with any of his problems by the world around him.
Definitely not. So we see here at the beginning, the Trash is wandering the streets of Potenville, Indiana. He's the only survivor in the area. We quickly learn that he's heading to some big old cherry oil refinery tanks to blow them up because why not? They're there. Let's blow him up. He's the Trashcan Man.
He's always wanted to.
Mm-hmm. And he finally gets to do it. It's his version of jerking off in the home plate of Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, we've all, that should be our next discussion question. What is your personal jerking off on home plate in Yankee Stadium?
I kind of don't want to know. I think that gets a little too personal. I think you should all just keep those to yourself.
Yeah, on second thought. But yeah, I mean, so we've had this parallel of the characters in these chapters, having brushes with death. In this one, it's not anybody outside of Trashcan Man trying to kill him. It's sort of him almost trying to kill himself. He almost succeeds.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. He does. But he decides that he wants to live, though, and he's got a mission.
He's got a purpose. Yeah.
I really love the opening bits of the chapter, though, Matt, as we kind of cut very rapidly back and forth between Trash in the present and his life story. This kind of cutting back and forth. It really reminds me of the fever dream that happened in the Flagg chapter, right? Trashcan does not have the fever. He is not dreaming, but I think it's just a great way of demonstrating how confused and essentially broken his mind is, right? He doesn't have the normal flow of thought processing that other people do.
Yeah, he loses snatches of time. He does things that don't even make sense to him as he's doing them. Mm-hmm. It's this feverish. Another word that kept coming up to me is like hypnotic.
I like that.
Because I felt like I was sort of being hypnotized into the frame of mind of the character, which is really a sign that the writing is incredibly strong.
I totally agree. Like, this is one of those things that, like, you read this chapter and it works so well. And I mean, I think you could step back and say it feels easy if you wanted to, but I think there's a lot of incredibly complex writing work going on to make a chapter like this work.
I agree.
So that life story, by the way, as we've kind of alluded to, is a pretty sad one. Trashcan Man's father murdered a bartender and his two brothers and sister, and would have murdered his mother and him as well, but the gun exploded in his hand, and then the local sheriff took down the exploded hand and head Trashcan Man dad.
Yep, classic Stephen King facial removal gun explosion. I thought it was really interesting how Trashcan blames the sheriff and like really holds it against the sheriff for shooting his father.
Yeah.
Like clearly the sheriff was in the right here. Like I'm not like piling on Trashcan. I'm really just kind of pointing out like this is yet another irrational swerve that we see where it's like, yeah, that's not like his inner life is so confused and chaotic and full of like pain that it's like, yeah, sure. I mean, the guy did shoot your dad and then your mom married him. That's kind of weird. Mm-hmm. That's not as weird as, not as bad as your dad murdering all your siblings. But I guess when we're in this domain, who's keeping score anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was always a symbol of him like being intellectually incapable of even associating his father with man who murdered the rest of his family, and really just saw him as my dad. And so here's the man who shot my dad. That's bad guy because he shot my dad.
Yeah, sure. I agree.
So yeah, as you said, Trashy's mother eventually marries the sheriff who put his father down, and it's right about this time, probably somewhat related to this. I'm saying that very loosely, definitely related to this. Trash starts starting fires. It's, as we said, obviously an outlet for this horrible, strange, traumatizing, confusing life he's been living. Eventually, his stepfather has had enough and steps in and sends him to, I guess we could call it a mental hospital, right?
Yeah.
It's a place where they perform shock therapy on him to solve his desire to start fires, which we see here, like, textually just destroys his brain. Like, his brain was probably not already working too great before this, but this is where basically the losing time and stuff comes from. It just absolutely destroys his brain. We see here that he tries to go back to school. He studies really hard, but like forgets half the stuff he learned when it comes time to take the test.
Yeah, right. Just piling on insult to injury.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's really sad. I like this part though, where he's kind of climbed to the top of the cherry oil tank, and we see this. Leaving the gas where it was, he took the toolkit over the pumping machinery and began to puzzle it out. He had an intuitive grasp of machinery. He could handle it the way certain idiot savants can multiply and divide 7-digit numbers in their head. There was nothing thoughtful or cognitive about it. He simply let his eyes wander here and there for a few moments, and then his hands would move with quick, effortless confidence. So we see here that, like, he's got his talents, right? He's good at things still, and this is one of them.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Flagg's savant-like nose for trouble that has been observed across a few different stories.
Sure. I also really like this moment. Off to his right, near the knee-high railing that circled the edge of the tank, he saw a bug struggling weakly in a puddle of gasoline. I'm like the bug, he thought resentfully, and wondered what kind of world it was where God would not only let you be caught in a big sticky mess like a bug in a puddle of gas, but leave you there alive and struggling for hours, maybe days, or in his case, for years. It was a world that deserved to burn. That was what. So here, this is another, like, something I brought up to you in chat earlier this week was this idea of, we have a lot of God talk in this book so far. You know, it doesn't seem like it's a particularly religious book, at least at this point, but people mention God a lot. And I think that's, you know, something that's relatively normal in our society, especially our society of 30 years ago or more, that a lot of people are religious. And so a lot of people frame things that they're happening through, well, God is doing this, or God did this, but I mean, it is very prevalent in this story.
Mm-hmm. It's prevalent, but not in your face, I guess, because it's like when you point it out, I'm like, yeah, you're certainly right. But I can't say that I noticed that as a specific theme. You know, the main thing that brought it to my attention as a theme was, funnily enough, the fact that the like audiobook cover image has like a prominent, you know, Christian cross in it. But so it's like, yeah, that's okay. I guess we're doing something with that. But
Sure.
But no, I mean, you're definitely right. You know, like Stu, when he gets out of, when he escapes, he thanks God and so forth. So
yeah. It is interesting. Like we kind of already talked about this, but the way the book describes Trashcan's fire starting, it's like he just kind of passes out, and then when he wakes up, he's starting fires. Like, it's a compulsion. Like, he just doesn't remember walking into the church, doesn't remember getting the gas canister, but he just wakes up and he's pouring gas on these pews in this church. And it is like absolutely the thing that gets him in trouble. And he's not even conscious that he's happening, but he continues to do it, and it continues to get him sent to prison, because he burns a church down and gets sent to prison for it, and is, of course, horribly abused there, because that's just, his life is just awful.
Yeah. My favorite was like the kid from school being like, "Hey, Trash, why didn't you burn down the school?"
Yeah.
just a little moment of levity.
Yeah. But also, like, it's interesting, like, that kid is a constant refrain in his head, right? That's one of the voices he constantly hears, and it's just like this one kid has had this incredibly huge effect on him, in like helping define who he is and what he believes. And like, it's just, you want like someone to, like, you want so desperately for people to like help him, you know, like there was a chance to help him at some point in his life, to help him deal with the things he's going through, to help him understand, to help him become a person maybe. And no one did. everyone took the easy way out, or just insulted him, belittled him, uh, threw him out. And it's just sad, man. It's just really, really sad. Like he just seems to have so little control over the state that he's in and the position that he's got himself in.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's certainly a parallel between him and Nick, right? Because they're both people who have really, really significant, you know, I don't know, limitations in various regards.
Sure.
You could even include Lloyd in this, by the way. Like just really drew a raw hand.
Mm-hmm.
And Nick did have somebody who helped him. Even, you know, he lost his parents, right? But he had one guy who helped him. And it actually seems like Trashcan Man had 0 people who helped him ever. And maybe that, you know, maybe even the point we're making is like, you really only need one person to kind of help you in this life. And you can avoid some of the worst outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. So sad. So sad.
Mm-hmm.
So Trashcan lights the fuel tanks and starts to climb down. He thinks about just dying right there like that bug trapped in the gas, but he didn't seem to want to. It seemed vaguely that there might be another purpose in his life now, something very grand and great.
How exciting. What could this be?
What could it be? What could it be? I really want to talk about how King writes the explosion, though. So there's this explosion goes off, and obviously Trashcan is kind of in ecstasy. And then as he's running away, one more of the tanks explodes, and it lifts him and forces him forward. And just look at the way he describes this. There was another one of the tanks, and the air resistance in front of him seemed to disappear, and a large, warm hand pushed him firmly from behind, a hand that fitted every contour of his body from heels to head. It shoved him forward with his toes barely touching the road, and now his face bore the terrified, pants-wetting grin of someone who had been attached to the world's biggest kite in a high cap of wind and let loose to fly, fly, baby, up into the sky until the wind goes somewhere else, leaving him to scream all the way down in a helpless power dive. It's the type of description that makes you want to go, yeah, maybe it would be cool to get thrown forward from a big explosion.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty neat, actually.
Sounds awesome, especially if you're the kind of person who has an almost like sexual feeling toward fire and explosions and everything. Mm-hmm. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, also he comes out of this whole ordeal pretty horribly injured, but like in his state of mind, it's so disconnected that he barely even notices.
Yeah, I mean, you get the assumption that he's probably gotten pretty badly burned, and I think there's one line is like that his skin was already starting to turn red, and you're like, oh gosh, yeah. Okay.
He's burned and he broke a wrist, I believe.
Yes, he did break his wrist.
But he's just like, yeah, whatever. You break wrists sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So Trashcan decides that the purpose to which he alluded earlier was to start fires all over the world, bigger and better fires ahead. And I guess as we leave the chapter and as we leave Trashcan, the question I need to ask you, Matt, is what are we doing with this guy? Like, we have this character we've introduced. You know, I think we kind of see maybe not a clear path, but an understanding of like what Larry's role in this book is going to be, or what Larry's going to be struggling with. Franny, I think, also as well. Maybe Nick and Stu are a little less clear, and then we've got Lloyd and Flagg as, you know, some of our baddies or potential baddies, and then it's like, who is this guy, and what is the story going to do with a person like this? And I'm just curious what you think here at this moment.
Yeah, right now I'm sort of fixated on the idea that we've got some religious connections. We've got this like. There have been some notions of like a cleansing flood, except here we have an idea of a cleansing fire. Or you could also say, you know, instead of like a cleansing holy fire resetting the world, we could be making an analogy to hellfire. And like, this is actually, you know, bad. This is that rough beast slouching toward Bethlehem. I'm kind of open as to how exactly we're going to use this particular character, right? Because you could... You know, burning everything down at this point isn't necessarily bad. It's like, so what?
Yeah, right.
Well, nobody was going to use that oil anyway. So,
right.
But also, it could very well end up being bad if it turns out that, like, well, there are maybe, you know, enclaves of survivors that are going to be adversely affected by this.
Yeah, I guess we haven't really talked about what like 0.6% of the United States population actually is. And I know that's not going to be an accurate depiction of like all survivors, right? Because some people are going to die trapped in prison cells and like, but that's still like I think what's the population of the United States right now?
Well, so I just looked up in 1990, it was 250 million people.
Okay.
So 0.6% of 250 million people
is like
is 1.5 million.
Yeah. So that's a lot of people still.
It's still a lot of people. You know, they're spread. They're really spread out.
Yeah.
I mean, this is I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but like one interesting thing about the time that we spend in New York City coming up is like there's going to be a lot of survivors in New York City, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like probably I can't do the math in my head, but I would
thousands.
say at the very least, at least hundreds, right? Yeah. So anyway, I mean, the point is the fact that Larry and co don't run in. Well, they do run into a couple of people, right? But they run into very few people. I think is interesting, right? It's like people are hiding from each other. Anyway, that was just we'll get back to that in a minute, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I did this. I looked this up while you're looking. In 1990, there were 7.3 million people living in New York City. So 0.6% of that is like 430,000 or maybe 43,000, something like that.
43,000.
Like that's a lot. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people still.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are correct. That is a lot of people.
And yeah, we haven't really seen them yet. I mean, we've seen traces of them, right? Like someone stabbed the monster shouter to death.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't know who.
It really makes me think about Lloyd, actually, where there's all these people in Lloyd, but they're like hiding in the cracks.
So you're jumping the gun on me there.
I know,
because that's the big thing I thought about in the New York City stuff as well.
We're like basically there, aren't we? So
yeah, we're there. So yeah, let's begin our final chapter. It's chapter 35. This is a Larry chapter, and it's also the longest chapter of the week. And we are back with Larry and lovely Rita. And as you predicted last week, Matt, Rita is not doing well at all. She turned to him, her face haggard. If she had looked an elegant 40 in the park that day he had met her, she now looked like a woman dancing on the chronological knife edge that separates the early 60s from the late. There was a cigarette between her fingers, and the tip trembled, making jitters of smoke as she brought it to her lips and puffed without inhaling. So we learned that Rita has not been herself since they found the monster shouter dead in the park the day before. He was dead not from flu, but from stabbing. He was, I think Larry describes him as a pincushion. He was stabbed lots and lots and lots of times. And also, we learned that there's a smell permeating New York City. It's the smell of millions of dead bodies cooking in the hot sun without air conditioning. It's horrifying to imagine. Absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, right. That's one thing that I wanted to say about all of these chapters as a whole is like they all take different aspects of what would be horrible about living through this mass death and focus on those. So yeah, like the stench of millions of dead bodies, tens of millions of dead bodies. So like we were saying a second ago, I guess the idea of there's tens of thousands of survivors, but they're all hiding from each other. And the evidence that you do see of them shows that they're probably crazy, or at least a lot of them are. I think that's interesting, right? It's like, is that Stephen King making a statement about the way people are, or is this like, is this a sort of specific thing about the people who are immune to the virus are maybe special in some way?
Sure.
Special, like they're chosen. They're chosen either they're people with a spark of goodness in them, or they are monsters. Because I feel like if you look at our selection of main characters, there are some of them that are sort of the Eddie Dean Steely type, where it's like you can imagine them being hard asses, but also that they just have a heart of gold. And then some of them are actually, well, they're missing that, whatever that is. They're dangerous, they're weak, they're potentially monstrous, and I'm just wondering if like, beyond just being a commentary on human nature, it's like a specific sort of plot statement about this specific story. Is like we have the good, the bad, and the ugly, or something.
Well, I guess the question I have for you on that paradigm is, where does Rita fit in that? She's a immune.
Well,
I don't think she exactly fits in either of those two.
I mean, so perhaps this is super ungenerous to Rita, but like Franny brought us the idea of weakness being a problem, right? Like a
Sure.
person who is weak, that doesn't mean like, oh, that means they're not a threat. It's like, no, actually, that means they're super dangerous because they'll do horrible things because they have no core, they have no center guiding them. They'll do horrible things to avoid, being shamed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can even imagine the idea that the military was going to kill everyone just to cover up their shame as a kind of moral weakness, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I'm not necessarily predicting that Rita becomes, monstrous, but you could easily see someone who's that terrified being easily swayed and easily controlled.
Interesting. Okay, I like that. So the thing I want to point out here at the beginning of the chapter is how quickly I think we see Lara and Rita sort of exchanging roles. I think we discussed last week about how this woman was like clearly being compared to Larry's mother, both textually and subtextually. But at the beginning of this chapter, Larry is the one making Mama her breakfast, not the other way around. What his mom did for Larry, now he's doing for the mother figure, which is not really a mother figure because they're banging, but Stephen King and his edible complexes, right?
Yeah.
But Larry is kind of being the parent here. Rita is suffering and kind of assuming the child role, the Larry role, the one that needs to be directed and ordered and chastised. And I think because Larry is desperate to prove that he's a quote unquote nice guy, he's trying to make up for the mistakes he's made with his mother by taking care of Rita. And I think the thing we see here at the very beginning, and I think remains true throughout the entire chapter, is he's not doing a very good job at that. He's constantly getting annoyed with her. He's angry with her. And he keeps in his mind comparing her to the stronger version of her that he saw earlier. The version, by the way, that he slept with. And I think this is really interesting because it's like you can kind of see him immediately latching on to this older woman who is this mother figure for him, who the text compares him to his mother. And then suddenly she's the scared, childish one. And he's like, wait a minute, I didn't get into this dynamic to be the parent. I wanted my mommy back. And so I was making you my new mommy that I sleep with. But I just think it's really interesting that he's frustrated by that, but he can't just leave her because now he's got all this stuff in his head from his mom and from the Brooklyn accent woman who doesn't call him a nice guy. He's got all these things floating around in his head, and he wants Rita to be the proof positive that, no, I'm an actual good person. And so he's using her as kind of his project, his pet project here. And in doing that, I think he's missing the depth to which Rita is not okay. like very much not okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost comical if it wasn't sort of scary and sad, how ill suited he is to this role. And also I think that another comment along the lines of what you were saying, like I don't, this isn't textual explicitly, but like I wonder if his getting angry at her, her apparent weakness and fragility and emotionality isn't a sort of proxy for him being angry at himself.
Yeah.
For his own lifetime of self-perceived weakness and poor decision making.
Yeah. It's almost as if by assuming the parent role, he kind of says, "Oh, my mom had a good point."
Yeah, like
this is fucking annoying. Actually,
this is hard. Oh, this sucks. Actually, it's the me reaping, living my life as a drug-addled musician. Me sewing, whatever. I'm messing up the metaphor. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. I really like this part in particular where like he's basically forced Rita to eat, and then she immediately throws up everything she's eating. And then she's like super apologetic. She's like, please don't be angry with me. And he says, no, he told her, I'm not angry. It's just that, I'm not your boss. If you didn't feel like eating, just say so. I told you. I said I didn't think I could. The fuck you did, he snapped, startled and angry. She did. Like, check the tape. She did specifically say she doesn't think she could eat.
Check the tape,
and he just ignored it. Um, and I also love that, like, I'm not angry, he told her. 2 lines later, he said startled and angry.
Uh-huh. Oh God, yeah. I mean, it is pretty evident that Rita is not doing anything wrong, beyond, you know, being understandably freaked out, and he's, if anything, like he's overly emotionally reacting to her sort of understandable freak out. Like that's it's an interesting kind of self blindness, because like he's having his own meltdown, like his mom just died, but he's sort of like being like, God, damn it, Rita, you're annoying me so much. It's like Larry, you're having your own reaction. You're just sort of like externalizing it. At least that's what I think is happening with Larry.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right there. And yeah, I think this is not to say that Rita isn't, like, I want to make it clear here that, like, I think Rita is deeply unwell and not doing a great job of keeping it together. And I'm not like chastising Larry as a way of saying Rita's behaving completely fine, but I just think like he's the exact wrong person to help her through this, I think is the main point I'm getting to here.
Totally. Yeah.
Because I do think, like, one thing she says over and over again is, please don't be angry with me. Please don't leave me. Right. And we don't get to see inside her head a lot. In fact, we haven't gotten to see inside her head at all. And you could build a version of this character that is just like absolutely terrified and is just like, I need this person. I need this person. The only way I'm going to survive this thing is with this person. And I'm so fucking afraid that he's going to leave me at any moment. And I'm going to acquiesce to every single fucking thing he says. And so every time Larry gets even a little bit mad at her, it's like triggering her worst possible fear, because she's like, okay, this is it. He's going to leave me. This is it. This is it. This is happening. I'm screwed. I'm fucked. And so like, the moments where he thinks he's just being a little bit irritated are to her like the scariest moments in her life.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. That is my model of Rita.
So they decide that they need to get out of the city. Rita wants to get out of the city, and they're going to do it. So they do so. And to prepare for this, they break into a sporting goods store, and they prepare for what Rita calls their grand adventure. And I needed to quote this for you here, Matt, because it's, of course, Tolkien. The beginning of a journey, she said, and then so softly he wasn't sure he heard correctly. The way leads ever on. What? It's a line from Tolkien, she said. Lord of the Rings. I've always thought of it as sort of a gateway to adventure. The less adventure, the better, Larry said, but almost unwillingly, he knew what she meant. I love that. I love that so much.
Oh no, now I'm invested in Rita as a character. I wasn't before, but now I am.
I also kind of like, I mean, God, I'm shitting on Larry so much this week and last, and I'm sorry about it, but like, she's trying to psych herself up, right? And she's again, Rita is terrified. She's absolutely terrified, but she knows they're about to go on this journey, and she's scared about it, but she's trying to psych herself up. And she's like, oh, it's going to be like a grand adventure. I've traveled all over the world, but I've never been on an adventure before. And so that's how I'm kind of like mentally girding myself for this thing, is I'm going to frame it as a Tolkienian adventure story. And Larry's response to that is, the less adventure, the better.
Yeah.
And he still knows what she means, but he doesn't say, no, I know what you mean. He just says that to himself, not to Rita.
Yeah. Well, he lacks self-awareness in a pretty big way. Like he's not aware of how freaked out he is. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even after the subsequent tunnel scene, he's still going to somehow manage to not realize how freaked out he is.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I want to talk about this little bit where he does kind of realize the Tolkienian nature of this. And this is, you kind of spoiled. I reading this section really reminded me of Lloyd a whole bit. It was a walk that Larry Underwood never forgot. He found himself thinking that she hadn't been so wrong, to quote Tolkien at that. Tolkien with his mythic lands seen through the lens of time and half-mad, half-exalted imaginings. People with elves and ents and trolls and orcs. There were none of those in New York, but so much had changed, so much of it was out of joint, that it was impossible not to think of it in terms of fantasy. A man hung from a lamppost at 5th and East 54th, below the park, and in a once congested business district. A placard with the single word looter hung around his neck. A cat lying on top of a hexagonal litter basket, the basket still had fresh-looking advertisements for a Broadway show on its side, with her kittens giving them a suck and enjoying the mid-morning sun. A young man with a big grin and a valise who strolled up to them and told Larry he would give him $1 million for the use of the woman for 15 minutes. The million, presumably, was in the valise. Larry unslung his rifle and told him to take his million elsewhere. Sure, man. Don't hold it against me. You dig it? Can't blame a guy for trying, can you? Have a nice day. Hang loose. So what was your, I mean, that's kind of beautifully written, but also horrifying, right?
I mean, it's horrifying. I think like almost the more horrifying part is that the guy has this attitude and he uses these, phrases. Hang loose. Well, also the one that jumps out to you is, you dig it, which reminds you of
Baby, Can You Dig Your Man?
Song, yeah. Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? Just, I don't know how many people were using that phrase in 1990 or 1980 or whatever. I mean, probably a lot, but it does jump out whenever you see it in the story.
Yeah. I mean, I love the casual way, again, with which he recounts the story of a man offering to buy Rita.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so in the next bit, Rita calls the man who propositioned them John Beresford Tipton, which is actually a reference to a 1950s TV series called The Millionaire, where this mysterious benefactor on the show had that name, and he would give $1 million to a random person and just tell the story of what happens when a random nobody gets $1 million. How does it change them? What does it do? So that's her way of processing it. But still, you got to think, a man just walked up to Larry and offered to buy her for 15 minutes. Just do whatever he wanted to her. And Rita doesn't know Larry that much. And was there a moment in her mind where she was like, oh, maybe he would do that? And if that's what people in this world are going to do now, that's really terrifying. And again, I don't think Larry fully understands the terror that must have caused in Rita.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, he doesn't, we don't, so we're in his head, right? And we don't get the moment where he checks in on her, or even he looks over at her and sees what her reaction was. We just get the comments that she made about it afterward, which kind of tells you oh, she's bothered by it, obviously, as you would be.
I think the text says something to the effect of she rather cheerfully referred to him as John Beresford Tipton. And I'm like, did she, or was that just her way of processing utter terror?
Yeah.
at the implication of this man asking to have his way with her.
Well, it reminds me of how she kind of seemed cheerful and ironically detached when he first found her on the park bench.
Right.
But we came to realize that was just kind of her just after impact shock response, and not some kind of massive maturity that allows her to take things in stride.
Right. Yeah. So at some point in the day, Larry realizes that Rita is hurt. He looks down and sees she's been wearing open-toed fancy sandals the entire time, which are just terrible for walking in. And the straps of these sandals have chafed her legs enough to bleed. And at this, Larry just loses it, man. Just absolutely loses it. He screams at her. He grabs her. He hurts her. This is the worst parts of Larry we've seen all rolled into one at this one moment.
Yeah. Pretty unlikable.
Yeah, it's awful. It's really awful. And I think to your point from earlier, he's mad at Rita, certainly, but I think it reveals to him and to us that he's also really mad at himself, because we get this line here, because that's her problem, part of her said with surly defensiveness. No, that wasn't true. It had been his problem, because she didn't know. If he was going to take her with him, and it was only today that he had begun to think of how much simpler life would be if he hadn't, he was just going to have to be responsible for her. Be damned if I will, the surly voice said. His mother. You're a taker, Larry. The oral hygienist from Fordham crying out her window after him. I thought you were a nice guy. You ain't no nice guy. There's something left out of you, Larry. You're a taker. That's a lie. That's a goddamn lie. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is him, he's mad at himself. He's mad at himself for letting this happen. That's the thing about Rita, and Larry is upfront about this. She has clearly lived a very sheltered life, right? She's had a person to take care of her entire life. She doesn't know what the appropriate shoes to go walking for 20 miles are, right? She just doesn't know. And he's not observant enough to realize that he needs to be he doesn't know how to be a parent, I guess is a great way of putting this kind of. He doesn't know how to take care of another human being.
He doesn't have any experience with being a giver, right?
Yeah.
He needs to not only quit being a taker, but simultaneously do something he's never done before, which is give of himself.
No. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think we have to at least acknowledge here, at least, like, we've been very rough on Larry. We have to acknowledge that he's trying, right? He is trying to be better. He is trying to be the best version of himself. He's just kind of failing at it. And I think it matters that you're trying, right? Like, because as we've talked about, Larry could go either way, right? He could turn into a selfish monster that, you know, leaves Rita to die because she's annoying him. But he also could be a good person. He has that in him. His mom said that at the very beginning. He has good in him. Just how do we bring that good out? And so I think it's worth saying that he does deserve some credit for trying to be better. We just have to acknowledge that he is not doing a great job at it so far.
Right. I mean, to me, in this scene that's unfolding here, where he screams at her and he storms off, the important thing is that he turns back. The important thing to me is that he's capable of regret and remorse. That
is true. But let me propose something to you here. The reason he turns back is because he starts walking towards the tunnel and he gets scared. And he wants another person there with him. And so he turns back and calls out for Rita. And then when she isn't there, he just kind of sits there for a while until the oncoming storm like makes it so he's like, fuck, I gotta just go. So like, I think, yes, it is absolutely true that part of him turned back specifically because of regret, because he knows he overreacted. And one of the big things we see here is not only did he overreact and get mad at her, but then he apologized to her and she didn't immediately accept his apology, which caused him to overreact again and flip out on her. He did also turn back because the tunnel was super scary and he didn't want to go in it by himself. Like, so that's definitely part of it. It's definitely part of it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point. I almost wish I could contradict you, but no, you're right. But I think that's the fun dichotomy of Larry is we maintain an uncertainty. We mentioned this, like we've talked about this a little bit almost every week. The idea that it's like the story keeps giving him opportunities to kind of show his quality, and he just keeps flubbing it, but not in a way where you're like, oh, he's actually a monster.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh, he's just come on, like almost, you know.
Yeah.
He's so trying, right. He's trying, like you said.
Yeah, he's trying, and trying does matter. It does.
Yeah.
You just gotta get there, buddy. Hopefully, he'll have the opportunity.
Yeah.
And now begins, Matt. I can't wait. One of my favorite sequences in the novel, and legitimately the first time I read this book, one of the most terrifying things I've ever read. The Lincoln Tunnel sequence is a masterpiece, and I think I wanted to talk about this a little bit broadly before we get into the details of it, because there's a thing that happens on this show sometimes where there's these big moments in these books we're reading that I've read before that like I'm really, 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 really looking forward to you getting to a certain point. And I'm really excited about getting to this point because it was this super important memory in my life and I can't wait to get there. And sometimes when we get to those sequences, I find that I don't have a lot to talk about, because like it's just so self-evidently great that it's just like, and yeah, that was great. But I don't feel that way about the sequence. I feel like this is a masterpiece, and I feel like there's a lot of specific reasons for why this works very, very well on you, and I'm really looking forward to talking this all out with you.
Yeah, totally. And I felt the same as you do.
One of the things that surprises me so much about it is like, it's like 3 pages long. The Lincoln Tunnel sequence is like 3 pages in this 1,100 and something page book. And yet it looms for me as like one of the biggest parts of this novel. And it's just amazing the way your memory will do that.
I mean, I just read it and I think I would have insisted that like most of the chapter was the Lincoln Tunnel sequence.
Nope. Nope.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into it. All right.
Yeah.
Larry, tired of waiting for Rita and aware of the oncoming storm, finally works up the courage to enter the pitch black Lincoln Tunnel. The tunnel is stuffed with cars who are stuffed with corpses, but fortunately, there's a pedestrian walkway that is totally not filled with zombies at all. There's none there. It's going to be fine.
Yep. Don't worry about that. Don't think about that possibility.
Speaking of thinking about that possibility, I think the key to the success of the sequence is actually how King builds to it. I think Larry's mood right here regarding Rita is actually really important to the whole scene, as is the oncoming storm that's happening, as is the book kind of taking the time here before Larry even walks into the tunnel to basically list for us all the things he's scared about. And they're potentially happening here. Like the corpses are going to move around. There's going to be something alive in there. Like all these things. Like I think sometimes the way fear is most effective for me is that like, before you even enter the scary situation, you think about all the potential scary things, and then because those things are now fresh on your mind, they take new life when you're actually in the situation. Like I have these very distinct memories of taking out my trash when I was a very little kid. Like my parents would have me roll out the trash can on the night before trash night, and I would be like girding myself to do this, just thinking of the monsters that were going to get me while I was out there. And I just like, and just I have this very distinct moment of the moment you put the trash can out by the curb, and then I turned around to go back to the house. And then like, that's the second that I knew something was chasing me. I knew it. And I think the moments before I went out there that I sat thinking about these potential things, like made that experience 100 times scarier. And of course, just like this sequence, nothing happened, obviously. But it's just like the idea of at any moment, something's going to grab me. At any moment, there's something behind me. It's moving right now. And it's just so fucking effective. It's so good.
Well, yeah, you can almost feel it there. You know, it's so funny because I remember I used to have to put the trash out too. And, you know, even when you feel like you're too old to be feeling like something's going to get you, your imagination can still create that sensation of like, I just know that there's something in the house.
Your brain is so fucking powerful, man. It's it's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's I'm getting hackles raised just thinking about it right now. Yeah.
So Larry enters the tunnel and things get scary almost immediately, Matt. The lighter, he said, this is the other thing he did is before Larry actually gets in the tunnel, he thinks about all the bad things, but he also thinks about all the good things he has. Oh, it's not that long. I don't have a flashlight, but I have this lighter. And I think the book, like one by one, takes those things away from him. So the first thing is, oh, the lighter. Oh, this provides me no light at all and is basically useless. Great. Awesome. Also, like he's like, I've been walking way too long. I definitely should have been at the end by now. How long can this tunnel be? It can't be more than like a mile, right? And I've been walking for like 20 minutes and I don't see the light. And it's just like one by one, all his certainties are drained from him. And again, nothing has happened and nothing does happen.
Yeah, right. That's the funniest thing about the whole ordeal is nothing happens. Like this isn't a criticism. It's the opposite. It's like, that's the power of the writing is, how does the scene end? Oh, he gets out of the tunnel with Rita. Yeah. But like it's such an ordeal. Every wrinkle, every like, you know, but what about this possibility? And then you're like, oh shit, what about that possibility? Oh my God.
Yeah, we don't believe this is a zombie book, right? But we don't know.
We don't know that it's not a zombie book, right? Like, yeah, that's the thing that definitely, like, what I mean, I was pretty sure it's not a zombie book, but even in that moment when he's gonna like step over the soldier's hand, I was like, Stephen King have the guy grab him? That could be a thing that could happen. I'm not saying it's a zombie, but maybe he wasn't quite dead. Like, there's all kinds of ways that King could play with that, right? And get you, right? And it's a book. Like, we're not even talking about a horror movie where you're like covering your eyes because you don't want the jump scare to catch you off guard. It's a book, and it still had that level of intensity on me. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. It is so good. All right, so then he gets to the corpses, Matt, and importantly, once again, he's not killed by these corpses are not killed by the flu, right? They're killed by bullets. And that opens up a whole new potential avenue of horror for Larry Underwood, not from zombies, not from corpses grabbing him, but the potential that there is just beyond the turn, there is a soldier out there with a gun on him, ready to open fire. And I love the writing here. Larry stood sweating, trying to make up his mind. The solid darkness proved the perfect theater screen on which the mind could play out its fantasies. He saw grim-eyed soldiers in germ-proof suits crouched behind a machine gun equipped with an infrared peeper scope, their job to cut down any stragglers who tried to come through the tunnel. One single soldier left behind, a suicided volunteer wearing infrared goggles and creeping towards him with a knife in his teeth. 2 soldiers quietly loading a mortar with a single poison gas canister. It's just like, of course your brain's going to do that. Every possibility, every permutation of what could happen to you in this moment just laid out in front of you.
Yeah. And you're, we are also visualizing that this, because like, again, I don't know that that's not happening. Like, I don't know that there's not a bunch of soldiers right ahead in this moment, first time reading it. It's so good. Just every possible, like, plausible and maybe not even plausible, but just the things you would think about in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. In this moment of indecision, Larry hears something move behind him. He shouts out, gets no response, and then decides to open fire with his rifle. It turns out it's Rita, and he shoots her right in the head, and she's dead now. Bummer.
Oh, no. Oh, man.
Okay, I made that up, but that could have happened, right? He almost shoots Rita in the head, and I really think, like, it really seems to be this important moment, right? Where he realizes how close he was to killing her. And I think it's this moment where I think he realizes that he has this woman's life literally in his hand, and he can't duck out and run on this one. He has to deal with it. He has to learn to take care of this person. As you so aptly put, he has to learn to give. And I think it's this really, really powerful moment for him in this scary, scary tunnel.
Just imagine how terrifying this must be for Rita.
Oh, God, yeah.
She didn't have a lighter, and then suddenly someone ahead of her is shooting at her.
Yeah, she hears someone call out. We learned that in the echo of the tunnel, she couldn't make out that it was Larry. So she's just like, she sees him goes in the tunnel, and she's got all the same fear that he has, except something does actually happen to her in that a man opens fire on her. It's oh my God, that's got to be terrifying.
Yeah, it's everything. Yeah, God, Jesus, yeah. Poor Rita. Mm-hmm.
So together, the two make it over the pile of corpses near the end of the tunnel and out into New Jersey. The Garden State. Everything's going to be fine now.
Oh, no.
And the chapter ends with this. Yes, she was looking at him with dumbfounded gratitude that made him feel uneasy. And I'll get some new shoes, some sneakers. I'll do just what you tell me, Larry. I want to. I shouted at you because I was upset, he said quietly. He brushed her hair back and kissed one of the scratches over her right eye. I'm not such a bad guy, he added quietly. Just don't leave me. I love that she doesn't reassure him in that moment. Like, she doesn't go, yeah, no, you're a good guy, Larry. Yeah. Of course you're a good. No, she just says, just don't leave me. I don't care whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. Just please don't leave me.
Right. Well, maybe, I think to riff on something we said on one of the previous weeks, like, maybe he's not a bad guy. I don't think the world, maybe he's not a good guy. Maybe the world doesn't need a nice guy. Maybe the world needs kind of a hard ass,
sure.
Kind of a hard edged guy. And so she's rightly recognizing, like, yeah, you're not a nice guy. I don't need a nice guy. I need a strong guy.
Yeah. Very, very well possible. Yeah. So that is where we leave Rita and Larry for now. They have escaped from New York. And where are they going to go next? Maine, I guess. They're heading up north.
Of course
Maine.
They are.
And that is it for our chapters this week. We will continue the stand next week with chapters 36 through 42. I don't think that's right. Is that right? Let me check that. We finished the end of book 1. We're finishing the end of book 1 next week. It just feels like too few chapters. But I think the chapters... One thing about this book, Matt, is the chapters start getting longer the longer you get into the book. Like, we are nowhere near halfway through this book, but this book only has 74 chapters in it. So chapters start to get a little longer.
All right. Cool.
It's 36 through 42 was correct. Chapters 36 through 42. So finishing book 1 with chapters 36 through 42 next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Before we go, we have to discuss the question that we offered up for discussion. Question.
Right.
That made perfect sense, didn't it?
I mean, I know what you mean.
We got to do the discussion question. What was last week's question, Matt?
Who's your favorite Harold Lauder type character?
Okay, so this question might have been a little premature of me. I was very excited to talk about Harold. And honestly, if I'm being honest with you, Matt, I thought that we were going to get another Franny and Harold chapter in this week's reading. So in my mind, I was like, oh, we'll do that chapter and then we'll have a little bit more knowledge about Harold, and then we'll go right into a discussion question. It'll be perfect. I miscalculated by one chapter. Spoilers for next week. The first chapter next week is a Franny chapter. Spoilers. Sorry. But
Okay.
So might be a little bit premature of a question, but I think it is worth at least exploring, who Harold is at this point in the story, right? And
Sure.
what do you think of he is and what he comes off of, and what I was trying to do with the question is by saying a Harold Lauder type character, like the perception of who this person is at the very beginning of the story, which is kind of a creepy, not great guy. We're built to dislike him from the beginning, I think. And there are many characters like this, I think.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to editorialize for just a moment too, and the idea of an incel is a phrase that I think we threw around without defining, and it's like,
sure,
and it's interesting because part of me always kind of flinches away from that particular term, because it's like on a first pass level, it's like, what are you just making fun of men who can't manage to land a girlfriend? Like, that just kind of seems mean-spirited and low. And it's like, well, that's not really what the term has come to mean. What it's come to mean is people who sort of turn that into their whole identity and then make it be like, and it's those women's fault. And turn it into misogyny instead of just like, I don't know, a healthy sense of their.
Well, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the term incel, like they came up with that, right? That wasn't like a term put on them. They labeled themselves.
Right. Yes, it's more of a subculture than just like a label for men who can't get laid. And I just wanted to say that out, because like I don't particularly want to rag on dudes who can't get a date. Like that's that, and that's not. I think that's not what we mean when we say a Harold Lauder type character.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Shall we go into the answers?
Let's do it.
From Felidao, Severus Snape isn't exactly a total incel, but he hits a lot of the common tropes, and along with Harold Lauder, was my introduction to the whole concept as I went through adolescence as both a King and Rowling fan. Snape met Lily Evans as a child and was predictably instantly friend-zoned. Undiscouraged, he continued to try to nice guy his way into her heart until Chad Thundercock, James Potter, came along and quickly had Lily fondling his golden snitches and riding his broomstick. You know what I mean.
Everybody knows what you mean.
That's very good. Severus Snape would definitely know what I mean, and he channeled his self-loathing, bitterness, and resentment into a lifetime of being a slimy, unpleasant, bullying asshole involved in questionable terrorist activities and bigoted ideology, much like many real-life incels.
True. That is true. Although he redeemed himself at the end.
Yeah, by doing one good thing. That's how
look, it's the way books work, man. You do one good thing and normally it costs your life, and then everything's fine.
Yeah.
All actions forgiven.
Good for him.
Yeah. Baby Can You Digger Sam says, since incels are truly loathsome, I can't say I have a favorite. Yeah, let's just, when we mean favorite, we don't mean like I'm a big fan of this guy. We're just like best
example. Yeah.
Most, like, I don't know. I like Harold Lauder as a character. I don't like him as a person, but I think he's a really interesting character. So.
Yeah. It's like my feelings toward Trickster in Worm, for those in the know.
Yeah. Sam says, I will mention the king of all incel fantasy, 1984's Revenge of the Nerds. This movie was on heavy VCR rotation in my home, and at the time seemed hilarious. It has not aged well. The notable incel in this movie is Louis Skolnick, who at his most despicable uses a mask to trick beautiful but snobby Betty Childs into sex. She then is so enamored of his amazing cock that she drops her jock boyfriend and declares, I'm in love with the nerd. What Louis did was rape her. She did not consent to sex with him as she believed he was her boyfriend. But back in 84, no one saw it that way. Not the filmmakers, not the audience, not my parents, and not 11-year-old me. All Lewis needed was a chance to prove his virility, and women would see how truly amazing he was. What a toad. That is one, like, I came to this realization as well a few years ago, and it's one of the most eye-opening, like, oh, yeah, wow. That's really fucked up, actually. And yeah, like, nobody, like, I don't know. I haven't done the research, but I want to, like, go back and read if, like, anyone at all wrote about this movie when it came out that was like, hey, that's a little fucked up, actually. That happened.
Right.
I just don't like, it's wild to me that, like, yeah, no one was thinking about that at the time. It was just a fun nerd joke because everyone thinks the nerds are bad at sex. So what if we actually make it so they're really good at it? Fun.
This would be like a serial killer thing to do in a modern film. Not
it's
like
fucking insane. Yeah.
Not like totally a comedy thing to do. Yeah. Fascinating. The ancient past of 1984 is such a fascinating time to look back on.
They also, by the way, break into a woman's sorority and install cameras in all their bathrooms and bedrooms, which is a totally cool and fine thing to do, actually.
Yeah. Boys will be boys after all.
Yeah, just... Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. Okay, let's move on.
All right. Quirky Bean says, just going to go with my gut and say pre-Reek Theon from A Song of Ice and Fire, since he shares a lot of similarities with Harold. He doesn't have a lot of true friends other than Robb and is generally unlikable due to his overly proud, know-it-all attitude. Theon feels overlooked by his family when they should be praising him, remembers his brothers fondly yet forgets the face of his sister, and doesn't appreciate his mother. He looks down on women as lesser things who can't think for themselves until they deny him, and he forces them to call him the Lord. Both are very entitled humans. Their respective worlds are very different, but I think if Harold and Theon swapped lives, they'd behave in similar ways. Theon literally had to be mutilated to learn some humility, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think pre-Reek Theon is the celibate part of the involuntary celibate, but I think he fits the Harold Lauder character certainly to a T.
Well,
I think that.
Sorry. Yeah, no. I mean, you're right. I think the idea is if Harold Lauder was a literal lord in a feudal setting, he probably wouldn't be celibate, right? He would be getting what he wanted, the way Theon does. So.
Yeah, definitely. Pear Jane says, while there's no Harold Lauder like Harold Lauder, there is Xander Harris of the Scooby Gang. 2 decades after Harold's bitter, put upon, pissed off teenager, we get the same kid, but framed far more sympathetically and problematically. I should preface this by saying that Xander is not my favorite Harold Lauder character. I don't know if I have a favorite because they're so inherently unlikable. Harold is a character who we're told to dislike. Xander is framed to be funny, irreverent. He's the heart of the gang. Of course, we know Xander is self-pitying, bitter, resentful, and puts his own happiness above his friends. Some of those traits seem to be presented as complexity, but he's frequently rewarded or at least not punished for being a really awful person. There's a spoiler in there, so I won't read that. But the twist here is the show's creator did not know Xander as Harold Lauder, nor does he know that he himself is Harold. So he spends 7 seasons wondering why his incredible friends keep forgiving his bad behavior. Xander's like one of my favorite characters in fiction and on one of my favorite shows. So obviously I don't think Pear Jane is like wrong here. I'm not going to like sit here and say, actually, let me tell you why you're wrong about Xander Harris. No, I think she's totally right. I will say that I think some of the biggest problems in the Xander characterization are poor writing decisions and not like poor, like, badness of character. You know what I mean? Like, I think some of the decisions not to show consequence to actions is just writers who went for a joke at the expense of the world that the joke inhabits. I'm allowed to insult my favorite show of all time because I know it backwards and forwards. I love Xander. I will always love Xander. I think Xander is frequently really the heart of the gang in that he actually serves that role often, but he also can be a miserable piece of shit a lot of times. And I think it is undoubtedly true that show punishes other characters for being miserable pieces of shit more often than it seems to punish him for doing it. So,
well, yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily fiction's job to mete out justice, right? Like,
Sure.
like,
Yeah.
and like we're all self-pitying and bitter and resentful, right? So like that's like it's the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that I have a point here. It's basically
Yeah.
just like I can see this character, this sort of character landing differently with different people who are,
Yeah.
you know, open to different interpretation. Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know the character though. Okay.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I think Pear Jane is 100% right here. But I still love my boy Xander. I still love him so much.
I understand. Eric H says my favorite Harold Lauder type is Cameron from the movie Dead Poets Society. That little shit ratted out the Dead Poets Club, got Mr. Keating fired, and made Neil kill himself. Seize the day. Seize these nuts, Cameron.
That's a great. I hadn't thought of that character, but that's great. That's great.
Dead Poets Society. That's one of those movies that just makes me like mad and sad in equal measure.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
So frustrating. Last but not least, we have Sigma, who says, I have an odd example. He isn't an incel, and he's actually well-groomed, but he's still a bitch-ass motherfucker, so I'm going to answer with him. My Boy by Hitomi Takano is a complicated manga. Is it manga? Manga with alarming premises, but which handles it well. Satoko Tawada is an office worker who meets the titular boy named Mashuyu Hayami, whom she senses suffers from a similar loneliness and estrangement as hers. At her office, she somehow got an ex-boyfriend as her boss, and the boss, Fumtaka Shikawa, is the bespectacled fuck, doesn't seem to respect boundaries. He teases her on occasion, routinely refers to Tawada by her first name, which is pretty disrespectful to do in Japan if you aren't close. It's like walking up to a stranger and giving them a pet name immediately. He invites her over to meet his fiancée, and it's clear he's shoving his engagement in her face. Later on in the manga, he does get a justifiable moment, though one of you two would agree with. What does that mean?
I guess we'll have to find
out.
Oh,
no. Okay. No, the one you two would agree. I thought Steve saying one of us. I read it as one of you two would agree with, and I was like, wait, which one and why? No, he said later on in the manga, he does get a justifiable moment, though one you two would agree with. Then even later, he very much shows his misogyny, which is something of a running theme in the manga. I have to reread it now. For the last chunk of it, I read the fan scans, but just ordered the last volume. So I do really recommend the manga, by the way, but it can be a dreadful read at the beginning. It's a different type of drama, really. Well, obviously I have not read this, but I'm curious why I would agree with him, his justifiable moment. I'm fascinated.
I'm curious. Yes. Well, it's always fun to explore, you know, bad characters, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I guess like at the end of the question this week, I think the thing with Harold and the thing we have to think about is the thing we've been talking about in a lot of other characters, right? We are kind of primed to not like this guy, but as you pointed out last week, you also are primed to kind of have some sympathy for him a little bit. And the question is, as we learn more about him and as we see how he reacts to the end of the world, where is he going to go? Which way is he going to go? And what type of person is he going to be? Because I think the one thing the end of the world does is give every single one of our characters an opportunity to redefine who they are. They have all gotten out of their usual life, the life that they've been living, the life that they are or are not happy with, depending on who they are, and they have an opportunity here. And how will Harold take that opportunity is, I think, the big question of his character right now. And you know, he certainly seems like these other despicable characters that we don't really like very much, but does he have to remain that way? No, of course not. There's opportunity for everyone. So that's the big unanswered question of Harold Lauder, I think.
Yeah, and several of these other characters as well. But yeah,
definitely.
Him for sure, because he's just so, you know, repellent right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Literally, because he probably smells. Because he doesn't shower. Yeah. All right. This week's question, though, I think we wanted to do something in honor of the Lincoln Tunnel sequence, which is just an iconic and terrifying sequence, which, by the way, Matt, we're going to watch the 2020 miniseries, and I have a lot of things to say to you about that miniseries. But the one thing I have to say is they cut the Lincoln Tunnel sequence from the story, which is basically unforgivable as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. It's the worst decision they've ever made. They recut it into some new sequence that isn't close to being as effective as the Lincoln Tunnel sequence, and I'm still angry about it. I'm still mad.
Well, I hate them, Scott.
Me too.
I hate them, and I agree with you. And you know, revenge.
Good, I'm glad. I'm glad.
Do we seek revenge for this?
We do. We seek
Okay.
revenge by watching the miniseries after we finish this book and
Okay.
talking about how we didn't like it.
Okay, that sounds like my kind of revenge.
But anyway, in honor of that Lincoln Tunnel sequence, we wanted to talk to you about your favorite horror setting / sequence in a book specifically, because I think horror in books is very different than horror in movies for a lot of obvious reasons. And I think we actually asked a similar question to this in the past, Matt, just like your favorite horror sequence. So I kind of wanted to lean more towards the setting side, like the Lincoln Tunnel as a setting beyond the sequence itself is just like inherently terrifying. And I want to talk about those because I think the way you write horror in novels is so great and interesting. And I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, that sounds really fun. Can't wait.
So let's repeat that again without all my nonsense.
Favorite horror
would you
setting,
sum it up?
Yeah, your favorite horror setting / sequence in a book, I think with a focus on the setting part.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. That is it for us this week. As we said, The Stand will continue next week with chapters 36 through 42, which will see us to the very end of book 1, which is crazy to me, Matt, that we're already one book down, or will be next week. It's just absolutely wild to me.
I know. Yeah. I mean, the book is flying by, I think, because I'm enjoying it so much.
Yeah. It's been a month since we started The Stand. Can you believe that?
No.
It's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, or on the subreddit, reddit.com/r/doofmedia. That's a cool place to hang out. There's been a lot of activity on the subreddit recently. There's somebody who's posting every week. They'll post the differences between the original cut of The Stand and the version we're reading, and that's actually been pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, it's an incredibly cool thing that they're doing. So thank you to, as you were pulling that up, thank you to Reddit user Trumpet Cop, who is doing that. That is awesome. Everyone should read that. If you're following along with the book, just go check that out, because it's a quick summary. It's not a very long read. And it really fills in some of the blanks for the differences, because we're not really covering that on the show. We take enough time out of your week every week. We don't need to also add another whole segment to the show, especially when Trumpet Cop is doing such a perfect job of doing it already.
Yep.
All right. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, folks, what are you? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Do you want to be a Lloyd? Or do you want to be a Nick?
Scott, they're all subscribed. It's okay.
Yeah, you're right. How dare I assume? How dare I? But just in the off chance that you're not, you should probably do that.
You should probably do that. Yeah.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah. And if you enjoy Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Cara V, Griffin Q, Rena B, Literally Bismarck, and Michael C. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we've got over there on the Patreon. You got a lot of new faces and new names around the Patreon lately. I think it's just great. A lot of people are excited about The Stand.
Yeah, it's great to see. It is absolutely wonderful to see. And we will have a brand new episode of our monthly bonus show, Other Levels of the Tower, for you folks next week. It was supposed to be this week, but if you're a patron, you saw that an announcement post earlier in the week where we delayed it 1 week. So next week, we will be talking about the adaptation of Stephen King's Cell. I haven't watched this movie, but everything I've heard about the movie is not good. And the book was not great. So it's going to be one of those ones where we're going to have a lot of fun, negative things to say. I have a feeling, Matt.
Yeah, we have fun no matter what. It can be fun to rag on stuff for sure.
Sometimes it is. Absolutely. But of course, if you cannot afford to donate or pledge any money right now, that is absolutely okay. We appreciate your support in every way you can give it, which includes sharing our podcast with your groups. We have some friends in a Stephen King Facebook group that are, I think, sharing us. That's wonderful. You can, of course, always help us out by leaving a rating and a review. This week's spotlight review comes from Scorpy Whoa. Pretty great name, who gives us 5 stars and says, keep slinging. Keep this podcast coming, y'all. There may be other worlds than these, but I'm pretty content in this one or any other level of the tower where I can listen to this podcast. Found this podcast as I was finishing up Dark Tower Book 7 and binged all of Season 1, and now I'm burning through Season 2. The commentary is always entertaining and incredibly insightful. I've always been sort of a face value reader, and this podcast has really challenged me to look for deeper meaning and dig into the themes. Would give 19 stars if I could. Scorpio, that is so nice. Thank you so much, and I'm glad we help people, look a little bit deeper, because I think you enjoy everything you read a little bit more when you do that.
I agree, and I say this often. When I read things and I just read them, I read them on face value.
Me too.
It's really that's why we do these things, is because it gives us the opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper.
It forces us to. I think when I know I'm opening a book, as I am finishing up my Stephen King reread right now, and I'm reading the final book in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, and I read that book at face value. I don't think about it the way I think about these books. So it forces us to think about things differently, and it's delightful. I love it so much, and I'm glad you do too.
Yeah. So thank you, Scorpio.
Scorpio. All right, folks. We'll see you right back here next week for the conclusion of Book 1 of The Stand. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
Scorpio, whoa! Whoa!
Whoa!